The 3 to 4 hour rule is just a reflection of the fact that, like, if you look back over the routines and daily rituals of so many different figures in history, artists, authors, scholars, composers, you find again and again and again that the amount of time that they attempt to dedicate each day is very rarely more than about 3 or 4 hours.
This rule pops up throughout history. US presidents, literary greats, and world-renowned scientists follow it.
And this specific amount just occurs with so much regularity. It's kind of spooky.
Oliver writes that Charles Dickens, Thomas Jefferson, Alison Monroe, and J.G. Ballard all worked for 3 to 4 hours, as did Anthony Trollope, who claimed that he managed to write 250 words every 15 minutes during the 3-hour stint he put in each morning before heading out to his job at the post office. Today I'm chatting with Oliver Burkeman, author of one of the best-selling books on time management and happiness.
My name is Oliver Burkeman. I'm the author of the books 4,000 Weeks and Meditations for Mortals.
Oliver writes how Charles Darwin, while working on the theory of natural selection, concentrated for just 2 90-minute periods and 1 one-hour period each day. Celebrated author Virginia Woolf wrote for just 3.5 hours after a leisurely breakfast, producing 9 novels, around 50 short stories, 3 book-length essays, and scores of shorter works, despite ending her own life aged 59. The mathematician Henri Poincaré focused intensely from 10 to 12 in the morning and then from 5 to 7 in the evening, and then called it a day.
And I look at some of the reasons for why that should be, why it's very helpful to have lots of time in a creative career when you're not focused on the creative task because of what's going on in your unconscious and all the rest of it.
Specifically, Oliver references Alex Pang's research in his book Rest. Pang found that it's more effective to focus intensely during only your peak hours rather than half-heartedly all day. This is because creativity appears to depend partly on processes taking place in your brain while you're not focusing.
But the sort of takeaway that I draw from that is not that we can all necessarily afford to just do 4 hours work a day, because a lot of those people had many servants to handle the business of life. But just that, like, if you're in a sort of fairly autonomous professional situation where you get to schedule your day to some extent, it's a really good idea, A, to try to ring fence 3 or 4 hours in the course of the day if you can, to be free from interruption. And B, not to stress too hard about ring fencing any other time.
Oliver quotes Leonard Wolf, who wrote that his wife, as if moved by a law of unquestionable nature, went off and worked until lunch at 1. It is surprising how much one can produce in a year, whether buns or books or pots or pictures, if one works hard and professionally for 3.5 hours every day for 330 days a year. That was why, despite her disabilities, Virginia was able to produce so very much. This rule is important because our life is finite. We have far less time than we typically expect, and Oliver has anecdotal evidence to prove it. When he asked his friend to guess how many weeks the average human life lives, they said this.
No, one of my friends guessed 150,000 weeks, which I always like as an example, because if you double it, you get all human civilization since the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia. We really don't have 150,000 weeks or anything approaching it. I think that just speaks to this sense that the amount of time we have left in our lives is functionally equivalent to sort of forever, even though, of course, we all know intellectually that that's ridiculous.
The scholars, authors, conductors, and presidents who implemented the rule realized that they needed to ring-fence time to get things done.
I think that what I'm trying to suggest is that we are so finite as against the space of things that we could in principle do, or tasks that we could usefully complete, demands we could feel imposed upon us, all the rest of it, things to read, places to go. We're so finite that actually there's something very powerful about just realizing that getting anywhere close to getting your arms around it all, getting on top of everything, is just completely off the table.
Yet some of us attempt the opposite of the 3 to 4 hour rule. We spend every waking hour trying to achieve our goals.
There's a way of half approaching the topic of the finitude of life that you sometimes see, where people think that because life is short, that means they've got to really pack every day with amazing, extraordinary experiences. They've got to sort of put a lot of effort and honestly a kind of anxious stress even into really like sucking the most out of life. I tend to think that comes from not having quite followed this argument all the way to the end, right? Because it's still a kind of an attempt to win in the fight against finitude. And you're never going to do that, right? No matter how much you pack into a life, the number of things you could in principle have done but didn't do is always going to be vastly greater. And I think that is the point, as I say, when you can then let go of this futile quest to do everything and please everybody and fulfill every ambition that you can possibly think of. And then it's much easier to sort of fully pour your time, attention, and focus into doing a few things and actually doing them and making an impact with them.
I asked Oliver how these scholars following the 3 to 4 hour rule would manage a modern day email inbox.
The idea that if you have an overwhelming incoming supply of anything, that you're going to get on top of it by making yourself more and more efficient and optimized, being able to process more of it in the same amount of time. That's the flaw. What happens very obviously in the case of email is you decide to get much better at answering email. You answer email at a much quicker tempo. So you're replying more quickly to more replies. You're getting people reply to your replies. You get a reputation for being responsive on email. The end result is more email. As they say, the reward for good time management is more work.
And this is why so much productivity advice is flawed.
I think the general sort of abstract point here is just that if you take any system, including yourself, and all you do is make it more efficient at processing things, then in a world of effectively infinite inputs to that system, all else being equal, all that's going to happen is just that more and more and more inputs enter the system and need dealing with. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with efficiency in the sense that, like the example I've given before, if it takes you an hour and a half to find your clothes in the morning, there's something in your daily routines that could use a bit of improvement. The fallacy is thinking that ever more efficiency is ever going to get you to this place of total control, feeling effortlessly on top of everything, in the driver's seat of life, that I think we are often being sort of seduced towards by a certain kind of productivity advice that we never get to, never achieve.
The 3 to 4 hour rule is very inefficient. Most people can work for around 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and many can work for far longer. But by limiting our core hours of work, we might actually achieve more. Oliver explains why in his book, saying the rule acknowledges that in reality most of us don't have the capacity for more than a few daily hours of intense concentration.
So much of life is unpredictable. So much benefit comes from serendipitous parts of life. It's such a sort of losing battle to try to impose your will over 12 hours a day of any sort of normal life. The alternative to that is not just to give up trying to do that at all. The alternative to that is to be sort of quite devoted and dutiful about trying to protect 3, maybe 4 hours, and then cut yourself some slack, cut everyone else some slack too, and they interrupt you in all the rest of that time.
So ring fence a 3 to 4 hour period every day, free from appointments or interruptions, and then don't worry about imposing much order on the rest of the day.
And this is what I try to do in my work. You know, if I've managed to spend 2 or 3 hours, usually first thing in the working day, moving my main current project forward, then it's not only okay that the rest of the day is going to be much more scattered and in some sense unpredictable, it's a good thing, because then you get to have interesting conversations with people and follow lines of thought that you hadn't planned to do. Or above all, the other thing is to you can do some things that you feel like doing rather than having to sort of dutifully complete a sort of strict running order for the day. So you can harness the energy of oh, actually, you know what? I'd quite like to deal with that issue right now. So why don't I? So it's that balance between discipline and structure and the opposite that I'm talking about there.
And if you feel like 3 to 4 hours isn't enough, consider a quote from a New Mexico monk who starts his day's work at 6:40 a.m. and finishes it 3 hours later at 12:40 p.m. He was asked what you do if you feel like you've still got work to do. The monk replied saying, you get over it. If you liked today's episode, then you're in luck. Oliver and I recorded a bonus episode. For the bonus show, Oliver shares how social media kept him hooked, how he weaned himself off the platform. He explains that we shouldn't live inside the news cycle, and he advocates for people to spend less time worrying about global news and policies they can't control. Honestly, I could listen to Oliver talk for hours on end. His points are fantastic, so if you've enjoyed today's episode, I think you'll love the bonus show. To get access, just click the link in the show notes, enter your email, and you'll be taken straight to that bonus episode.